Without further ado, I switch on to the first information sharing principle. In this term, it's a NATO part. So NATO defined information sharing, the pure definition, is mainly in AAP 60, Allied Joint Doctrine for Communication Information Systems. As you may realize, it's not very ambitious and not really open to sharing. Maybe the reason is that many people in the technical domain think more about the technical aspects, of course, of information. Although everybody states that information sharing is crucial and necessary, security concerns are often overruling the need to share. So the basic idea is, if I don't share, I don't do anything wrong, and I don't do harm. But I think we all learned from mission over the last decades that this is different. And I will show practical examples why it is like it is. But as we are talking about civil information sharing, there's also another side outside NATO, so outside the fence, let's say. Therefore, here the example of a humanitarian stakeholder, one of the biggest, or the bigger one, UNOCHA, addressed the effect that exchange is necessary in any case in its UN Civil Military Coordination Field Handbook. It's a very good publication that provides some practical advice how to share information and in which scenarios that might be applicable. I strongly recommend to have a read about it if you're more interested into the topic of civil military information sharing. And then at the last stage for the basic framework, for the understanding, I have an academic point of view. As usual, this one is very extensive. So let's start from the beginning. Literature states that civil military information sharing is primarily an interest-driven process. This means that actors involved seek to collaborate with others. That's a baseline. This happens most of the time based on the assumption that something useful and relevant will be given in return for efforts made. So basically, I will give you something, and in return, I expect something from you in the future. People don't do it out of charity. I mentioned the words useful and relevant. What does it mean in the information field? Information can be considered useful to actors when the information meets their interests and helps actors towards achieving their own mission success. So criteria for usefulness are relevant, timely, valid, and reliable. I will not go completely into depth on these four adjectives because I think they're more self-explaining. The risk of vulnerability, which is mentioned there, what does it mean? So actors risk vulnerability mainly because of two reasons. Firstly, once information is shared with other actors, they lose the control of this piece of information. The vulnerability lies in the fact that they cannot know for certain what the receiver will do with the shared information. Second reason why we risk vulnerability is that civil military information sharing is often based on a non-negotiated agreement. What does non-negotiated mean? It means that actors who provided information expect valuable information from their counterpart in return in the future, as I said. Therefore, actors will have to trust each other because it's not a tit for tat. But what does trust mean in this context? Trust is our willingness to risk being vulnerable to another entity. So I open up myself. But why do we voluntarily want to be vulnerable? Because we expect that the other will provide something important to me when we require it. The amount of trust that exists between actors is based on previous experience. The better the experience was, the higher trust will be between actors. If you forget everything about this presentation, please just remember this one. Trust has been identified as the most important precondition for knowledge exchange. It takes a long time to build it up and just one action to destroy it. So, equipped with this baseline knowledge, I will provide you now some lessons that we distilled from a research last year. We had two researchers, a young engaged academic and an experienced military analyst, looking into lessons on CMIS from peacekeeping missions in Afghanistan, Kosovo, and some examples from Mali. First one is about requirements. Let's have a look at it. Academic research in Afghanistan found that CMIS was often impeded because specific information requirements were not clearly communicated among actors. People simply did not tell each other which information they are looking for. This has been problematic during the ISAF mission in a number of ways. In general, information must meet requirements set by actors, otherwise they are not relevant. This was one of the criteria that I showed you 2 slides before. Actors, especially in peace support operations, have different roles and mandates, capacities, interests, goals, but also caveats. These differences cause variation in their specific information requirements. Barely knowing other actors' requirements or poorly formulating your own makes it more difficult to share useful information among each other that meets the specific requirements of each other. If I do not tell you what kind of information I need, it's hard for you to know what to share with me. And to tell people I want to know everything is usually a bit too unspecific. But it's not only about the content itself. Sometimes it's also about the pure amount of information. Actors with limited capacities can experience an information overload if they receive too much unspecific information that does not meet their requirements. Think about an actor that has only a small assessment team of 1 or 2 persons, and you provide him with a whole set of PMISI ASCOPE information from your area of responsibility. This would most probably be received more as a burden than as a real support. And finally, an added advantage of showing interest in the information requirements of other actors is that it contributes to building and maintaining a relationship. Everybody likes it if the counterpart shows interest in what he or she requires, instead of just providing something. Conclusion is, it is important to define your own specific information requirements and to communicate these requirements to others. But that's only one side of the coin. It's also important to ask for and act on the specific information requirements of other actors. Doing this will help in exchanging information. So now we defined what we want to share. Now we need to know how to share it. Therefore, we reviewed military and non-military guidelines of several entities. Baseline was, most of the guidelines were unclear and lacked practical guidance. Remember the NATO one. Of the 15 documents we viewed, only a few can be considered useful for military actors. One of them is the one from the United Nations Refugees Agency. The document discusses civil military information sharing explicitly and offers best practices for military and non-military partners. Furthermore, the CCOE CIMIC handbook, which is available online, provides best practices that are helpful at least on field worker level. But this does not answer the question, what are the benefits of clear guidelines? Most importantly of all, guidelines reduce the uncertainty by offering a clear plan of action. Which information can or cannot be shared, how can they be shared, etc. Furthermore, the sharing of information can be encouraged by guidelines as they make clear that CMIS helps in achieving mission success. By reassuring actors that sharing is the preferred practice, it provides a secure framework to do so. People simply do not have to worry or have the excuse anymore to say, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share this information. Guidelines also contribute to expectation management. Nobody likes to be disappointed, and therefore it is good to know in advance which kind of information you can expect from your counterpart and which not. And finally, guidelines also provide a foundation for action, because the documents can be used to educate leadership on CMIS. This is important in order to create a mindset that looks favorable on civil military information sharing. After the what and the how, let's now look in the motivation to share information. So more than why. I explained before, the CMIS is an interest-driven process. Therefore, topics of shared interest can bring actors together. Furthermore, they provide an opportunity for long-term exchange relationships. Such interaction potentially creates a history of positive experiences, which consequently builds up trust over time. And as you may remember, this is the most important precondition for success in civil military information sharing. As an example, topics of shared interest to both military and non-military can be found in the cross-cutting topics, short CCTs. The NATO Doctrine for Civil Military Cooperation, AJP 319, identifies 5 cross-cutting topics with far-reaching effect in different areas of civil society, and therefore require cooperation between military and non-military actors. These are the protection of civilians, children in armed conflict, women, peace and security, cultural property protection, and building integrity. So the CCTs can help you to build up a trustful relationship with other actors. This can be exploited for other topics afterwards. The topic of shared interest are the reason to develop CMIS relationships. The actual opportunities for cooperation are provided by events like conferences, workshops, meetings, and that leads me to the next lesson. Improving civil-military information sharing with continuous and structured interaction. That sounds actually more difficult than it is. Why is this so important? Because continuity and structure creates trust. And that's why the last lesson was more or less a precondition for this one. Topics of shared interest usually imply the motivation to meet more than once. That's a continuous part of interaction. Examples of such topics could be the security situation of the local population or the condition of local infrastructure. Secondly, interaction becomes structured through reoccurring meetings where actors share information. Interaction between CMIS actors on a regular basis helps to build relationships, which in turn help to build trust. That leads us to the following recommendations. As explained before, the CCTs may offer an opportunity to identify a topic of shared interest, but that's only the framework or door opener. CMIS requires relationship building, and this is a step-by-step process. Following recommendations may help you to build up a trustful relationship. It turned out to be more effective if the interaction takes place face-to-face rather than online. I can tell you after 1 year in COVID home office, I buy this one for sure. The second, make sure that the same organizations always attend the same meetings. Thereby, you can ensure that information requirements are known. Maybe not right in the beginning, but after some time and some meetings, everybody should have understood what the other one is interested in. If the organizations always change, this will never become clear. Third one, during these meetings, discuss shared CMIS topics. This keeps everybody involved and makes the meeting relevant. This was one of the preconditions that I mentioned in the beginning. Fourth one, trust building takes time, and therefore meeting at home before you meet in crisis is advised. This process can be facilitated by establishing liaison relations beforehand. And finally, looking more into the interpersonal level of trust, sending the same people to CMIS meetings helps to establish a continuous relationship and to build trust beyond the institutional level. Interpersonal trust has proven to be more long-lasting and can be transferred into different mission contexts. So now we have our guidelines that allowed us to share information. We identified topics of shared interest and set up meetings and good relations to share information. Now comes an important question. How do I keep this information? A good start would be use the information discreetly. As discussed before, actors seek to minimize the risk of being vulnerable. When information is not shared discreetly or handled appropriately, trust between actors is hurt and actors become hesitant to share information with others. 2 examples from missions in Afghanistan show what can go wrong. First example is a boasting of military actors with information received by non-military actors during ISAF. Military actors did this to make this known to Afghan communities that they were collaborating with NGOs active in the area. From the civilian perspective, this was perceived as a negative influence on the humanitarian principle of neutrality. As you know, the humanitarian principles provide standards for organization involved in humanitarian activities. By boasting with information received from non-military actors, military actors put the staff and receivers of humanitarian aid in danger because their neutral position was compromised. The second example is about overclassification. CMIS is based on non-negotiated agreements. This means that there are often no explicit restrictions on the use of information. In mission theater, civil agencies sometimes tended to openly share their information with other actors, and by contrast, military personnel often fear the leaking of information and see it as a threat to operational success. In some occasions, the same piece of information received by a military liaison officer on one day could not be handed back to the originator on the next day because it became classified in internal military processes. While the classification of information is part of the military information management, overclassification of information makes the sharing of it more difficult, logically. tendency to overclassify information hurts the relationship with non-military actors. Non-military actors often felt exploited because they did not receive any information in return for their efforts made. The examples show that trust among actors was hurt. Trust from the military perspective was hurt because the sharing of information by non-military actors to populations could result in security risks. Trust from the non-military perspective was hurt because the military both undermined their neutrality and overclassified information. Decreasing or low trust in a CMIS relationship results in less information sharing in the future, and so it's a doom circle at the end. And this is damaging it on the long run. So that leads us to following recommendation. Process information while respecting and maintaining the sensitivity of the product and the provider. This one applies both ways. Maintain information control by classifying information per separate paragraph instead of classifying the whole document. Most of the time, actually, only small parts of a set of information is really classified, but because we have the tendency to classify the whole document with the highest classification possible, we limit our ability to share it afterwards. Make sure that information requiring discrete use is treated accordingly once entered into the organization's information management process. This means you stay responsible what happens with it, even if somebody else is using it. And finally, when sharing information, make the terms of use explicit to other actors. By this, you can make sure that the counterpart is aware what he's allowed to do with the information or what not, so he does not accidentally misuse it and harms the CMIS relationship. And this brings me to the last lesson. Free riding. I think everybody knows the situation when people take advantage of information shared during meetings without contributing to those meetings. Logically, this will cause certain actors to withdraw from the relationship because they did not receive useful information in return for their efforts as negotiated. Consequently, free riding hurts the trust existing between actors. To avoid free riding, a bit of expectation management is helpful. It must be made clear that expectations about what information to receive should differ between meetings. For example, in a large meeting attended by a broad range of actors, it is less likely that sensitive information will be shared. But the chance that free riding happens is higher as many different actors attend the meeting. In opposite, in smaller meetings attended by a limited number of actors, trust is higher, and the pressure of social norms makes free riding much more difficult. Such meetings facilitate the building of relationships and trust. Therefore, clear expectation management in preparation of meetings helps to maintain the trust among actors. Additionally, the building of both CMIS relationships and trust is also facilitated by informal gatherings. This is because a setting is created in which trust can be built on an interpersonal level. Interpersonal trust, as mentioned before, creates stronger bonds than professional trust or institutional trust. This strengthens information relationships. An example can be found in the informational channels between military and non-military actors during KFOR. Relation between KFOR's chief legal officers and United Nations missions in Kosovo and UNMIK legal staff were built up over the occasional beer at the UN camp. These informal meetings taking place outside working hours improve the civil-military relationship during the KFOR mission. But it does not always require beer. Trust in the work environment can also be fostered with a coffee corner talk. They can be used as an opportunity to plan small CMIS meetings. And from this discussion, following recommendations arise. Make use of informal meetings to enhance relationship building and trust on an interpersonal level. Second one, adjust expectations according to the kind of meeting. Small meetings for sharing information, especially on sensitive subject. Use larger meetings for networking purposes. And if you are an organization organizing a meeting, conduct some level of expectation management for the participants already by the agenda. If you're just participating in these kind of meetings, adjust your own expectations accordingly, so you won't be disappointed. And finally, create enough space in the bottle rhythm for both formal and informal meetings. Space is both time in a schedule as well as a suitable place to meet. Consider that meetings may be postponed or can take longer than expected, or in a nutshell, reserve room in your battle rhythm for the unexpected. And that was the last lesson that we derived from our research.